I appreciate being invited to come and talk to you today about the more specific area about the human factors validation testing that you'll be wanting to send into the agency with your marketing submission of whatever kind it is. So I'm delighted to tell you a little bit more about what's needed by us for that element of your submission. The same disclaimer applies to my presentation, that it belongs to you, the American people. So when I was getting ready for the presentation, I certainly see the driver, and obviously this is a complex treatment. It was impacted adversely during the COVID pandemic, where people really couldn't get into the hospital for the care they needed as they needed to regularly, and excess deaths occurred in this population of patients. So I can understand why the fire is lit under the innovation lamp, so to speak, to bring better possibilities to market to deliver this life-giving therapy to patients that need it. So my objectives are simple. What's human factors engineering got to do with your submissions? To talk through some best practices for analysis and reporting of your human factors engineering data to the agency for medical devices, and consider implications specifically regarding hemodialysis devices. And then just share a couple general human factors thoughts related to dialysis innovations, some things to think about as you proceed. So we do have, the agency since 2016 has a guidance in place regarding human factors, and it's titled Applying Human Factors and Usability Engineering to Medical Devices, and it's guidance. It tells you when to use different techniques and elements of human factors engineering during your medical device development, and the specific things that the FDA looks for in your applying human factors engineering to device development for things you want to bring to the marketplace in the United States. And our guidance does differ. It's more specific than the human factors guidance through the IEC and ISO overseas. So if you've only been concerned with complying with IEC 62366, IEC 62366-1, you may have set the bar not to the degree of specificity that we'll be looking for in your human factors validation data when you come with your submissions. So this guidance also talks about when to submit a human factors report. And in the case of hemodialysis devices, that the answer is always, because it's a high-risk device with what we'll talk about are critical tasks, and that might involve patient harm. So you're always going to be expected to deliver human factors validation data to the agency, and then what the content of that reporting should be in the realm of human factors. And the one dot I would like to connect more generally about the driver for human factors engineering is that it's part of the overall risk management that is needed for medical devices. That's spelled out in the ISO 14971 standard. It's just a subset of that, of looking to anticipate occurrence of use error that you can anticipate, and then devising risk mitigation strategies in your device design to lower the incidence or eliminate the incidence of those types of use errors with the device that could cause certain kinds of harms. So when you think about hazards that are related to people, on the right side of the slide, I have more conventional sort of mechanical, physical world hazards, about physical hazards and thermal hazards, for example, or electrical hazards, which have their own guidances and standards that need to be adhered to. I'm just going to take a drink of water real quick. So you have the more mechanical and easy, quote, easy to analyze things that might be more quantitative in the types of data you provide to the agency. But in the realm of what's relevant to human factors engineering, we're looking at things that have to do with people. So you have, in a broad sense, cognitive hazards, and other physical hazards that are related to us and how we will interact with your product in trying to use it correctly. So cognitive hazards, from our perspective, involve things such as a novel operating principle. You have a new mental model of how the thing will work, how it all gets, connects together, for example. I don't know how bold different companies are being in this regard, but that's a special kind of challenge to your prospective users when they interact with the product. Your consideration of how you put together your workflow and present it to the end user. Have you tried to make something that's complicated more simple by carving it up into smaller pieces or clusters of pieces that are logically put together? Think about how you lay out information, either on your user interface, software user interface, and also in instructions for use and quick reference guides, and also how you train information, how you present your training information to people. Think about the vocabulary that's being used and the grammar that's being used. I've seen challenges, and it's a big challenge if you're bringing something from another country into the United States, the kind of great care that needs to be taken with the writing and the translation of those materials. And also in some cases, a cognitive hazard that's growing with the introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning into devices is over-reliance on AI. And just like in the airline industry, we have an automated cockpit now for pilots, and that increases training demands, so they still remember what to do when they have to take over and manually control things. So there's sort of a similar concern in the medical device world as well. And then there are just the more physical hazards having to do with ergonomics or connection errors that through good design you can eliminate completely by making unique connections the only possible connections. In terms of dialysis devices, how you package your different accessories, you can sometimes make improvements and gains in, really how you label things and create the covers to things can sometimes be very helpful in helping people identify the accessories, how to put them together, and how to use them. And also you want to optimize visual, auditory, and tactile design to make it salient and easy to perceive and interpret and take action on by the people that will use it. So now I'm going to jump into the specifics of the considerations that you'll need to think about for your validation testing more specifically, but with the consideration that your validation testing really is a reflection of what you've learned about your users specifically, what they do, how they do it, who they are, how you've designed your device, and the environment in which it's used, and the way in which you intend to train it. So the first thing to do is be very clear about all that. So the first part of that is defining the intended users, the use environment, the user interface, and the training. And the most general expectation by the agency is that when it comes to users, that you define distinct user groups. In the case of dialysis in the hospital setting, there are generally two considerations. You have nurses, and then you also have dialysis technicians who have their own specialized training. And in those two groups, there's not a one-to-one correspondence in the tasks that are performed by those two roles in terms of their scope of practice, in terms of their certification and licensing. So that's one way of looking at two distinct user groups, that example. And then when it comes to home use users, you have caregiver users and the patient users to consider and understand how you are going to define those user groups, describe them in terms of their characteristics, in terms of their demographics, literacy levels, in terms of your patient users, the kinds of impact the disease state has on them cognitively and physically, as you will consider that in the design of your device. And when you've define those distinct user groups, the expectation by the FDA is that when you do human factors validation testing, that you'll have a minimum of 15 users for each of those distinct user groups represented in your data collection, your recruitment, and your data collection ultimately. Another consideration that becomes important when you're talking about home use is that what we're seeing really in the home use space is that you often have a caregiver patient dyad, a partner team that works together, and each partner team is a bit unique and will share tasks in the way that's suitable for that patient and that caregiver. So when you're looking to represent that in your human factors validation team, you'll be wanting to recruit those caregiver patient pairs to represent that aspect of use realistically. That's the word you'll see a lot: realistic, naturalistic, representative of actual use are the turns of phrase that you'll see a lot in the feedback we give to you. And another consideration in bringing a device to market in the United States is that in the United States, home care is not supported in the same ways as it is in other countries outside of the United States. So you want to gain an understanding and really understand the burden of tasks and understanding of your device that in many cases is going to be a higher bar and more burdensome for a person using these technologies at home in the United States because they may not receive the same level of home care visits by nursing or other healthcare providers to help with them administering home dialysis. I'd like to just mention a few considerations that are relevant to the environment of use is that when you think about the environment of use for home use, you should consider things like proximity to drain lines that will be needed with the use of your device. And this becomes a consideration when you're getting ready to prepare for the test environment for your validation testing. Again, that you'll want to have that available in the test environment so that all the tasks related to use of water and connections such like that can be simulated for the human factors validation testing. Another important consideration about the home use environment is a range of lighting conditions. People at home don't have the same, always the same access to, bright lights that would be present and expected, in the hospital environment, so to speak. So you'll want to include that level of realism when you simulate use for the human factors validation. You also want to simulate important considerations like distractions and noise that occur in the home use environment. There are plenty of distractions we know in the hospital environment, and there are our own set of the unique distractions in the home environment, and that needs to be reproduced and simulated in human factors validation of home use dialysis equipment. Another consideration for that simulation part of the study is whether you're going to be using a mannequin for a patient. And if you're doing that, just having the arm there is not really going to be sufficient. You really, need a full-size mannequin because it's going to influence the interaction of people trying to use their equipment around a person that's receiving the treatment. And in some situations, and this is a discussion to have with the agency before you make this decision about your protocol for validation testing, is whether or not it makes sense to use an actual use study environment to do the simulated task and objective data collection to really use a more realistic environment in a hospital for this kind of data collection. As I perused some actual a body of comments that have been delivered to industry, I noticed in one case that it's very important even to consider how you're simulating the fluids that are being used and are being interacted with during the simulated use. For example, the blood products should be simulated by blood that, a liquid that has the right viscosity and color as real blood, for instance, because detail like this could have an impact on what takes place in the validation testing and could skew your your data results in a way that would not be helpful to your submission. And I do want now just to mention too, the training that's given during the simulated use needs to replicate your intended training. So be explicit about what your intended training plan is, and bring the actual materials that you intend to use for training. Also, when you're recruiting, have some consideration to the actual demographics of who receives different kinds of dialysis treatments in America, so that your population of 15 users is as reflective as possible of these population statistics about hemodialysis patients. Then I'm really worried about my time. So I'm trying to think. We started at 20 past.
Janine,
Okay.
Janine,
yes?
This is Larry. Maybe about 4 or 5 more minutes. Is that okay?
Ooh, okay, speed it up. You'll want to execute use-related risk analysis. I'll show you a table. So I'm going to blip through this and show you a recommended format that shows what needs to be shown to be traceable. And the critical tasks relate to that table. So hold on if you wait for those slides. In terms of your task design, you really want to consider that there are elements of the validation testing that require objective scoring of tasks. And it's very important that you give consideration to how the matrix you'll be using to declare success for each task or failure for the study. And so that you can do that scoring, because the scoring of task success or failure directly feeds into the expectation that you will perform qualitative analysis on each and every use error, difficulty, or close call that occurs in the study, and interview the test participants on what occurred, so that you can perform a root cause analysis of those incidents, specifically to identify places where the device user interface can be improved to help lower the incidence or probability that those things will happen in actual use. And finally, let me just say for a few minutes that you want to make sure in this interview data that when you send it to us, you know what, I'm going to come here and go to my little table that's very wonderful about use-related risk analysis. Use-related risk analysis is the biggest challenge, it seems, to companies and sponsors to get it right and comprehensive for the agency. More than 30% of the deficiencies we write relate to the deficiencies around the use-related risk analysis. And the reason it's so important is because it defines what are called critical tasks, which have to do with the level of harm that can result if certain errors occur in the use of the device. And in the case of errors that will result in serious harm to the patient or operator, that's where your data really is proving to us or demonstrating to us the effectiveness of your risk control measures that you've designed into your device, and that you've done your level best and done what's reasonably possible to lower the risk of those errors when your device is used. And what feeds into the use-related risk analysis as you develop your device is what you've learned about and through preliminary analyses of use of your device, either by observing people with what they already use for this therapy, but also a couple other things. And that is known use problems with this type of device. The agency will expect you to conduct an analysis of known issues, known use problems, and then that needs to be reflected explicitly in your use-related risk analysis to show that you're designing in-risk mitigations in your device to address those known use problems. The other thing that feeds into the details of your use-related risk analysis are formative usability tests and formative analyses, and that is less formal usability tests where you have people simulate use of your device and observe the errors that occur, and then you're still in the development phase very actively and refining the use of design of those risk control measures to be effective. And you want to make sure that you're including all the stakeholders involved in the device, all the intended users in their device, what they do with your device, the environment, and how it can influence the occurrence of use errors. And again, that training, which is very, very important, obviously, with dialysis technologies. So this is a best practice use-related risk analysis table that we've developed over time. Sadly, it is not in our guidance document, but it's here today in these materials for you. And if you ever contact us, if you needed it, we would certainly send it to you. But it shows the traceability of all the elements that allows us to look at your use-related risk analysis and understand that you've connected the dots between the task, each step in use of your device, the kinds of errors that can occur in terms of perception, cognition, and action with each of those steps, the clinical harm that's related to it, whether that sets that task into the category of critical task, and the gotta have data in your validation for that task, the measures you've used to mitigate those errors, and then where you're going to validate that in your human factors testing, whether that be simulated use scenarios or knowledge tasks for things that can be simulated regarding warnings, cautions, and that kind of thing. So this table gives you a nice way to think through that space, and also almost necessary way for us to be able to see that traceability. If you give us multiple tables that you think we should be connecting the dots on, there's a good chance you're going to get a deficiency that requests the information be consolidated in this way to show that traceability. And finally, I want to talk about presentation of your results to the agency, the kind of format you want to use for that when you've executed your testing and you have your data. And that is, again, to use those tasks, the same task IDs that you used with their use-related risk analysis, and then be quite explicit and organized in terms of each task, the number of task failures, whether they be use errors or close calls or use difficulties, when they happened, that subjective feedback data that you got, the real words that participants used during those subjective interviews, your root cause analysis of that information, and then your discussion of residual risk and whether you think there's more that can be done. And clearly, if you've got a bunch of users that have made mistakes and they point directly to what was in the user interface, whatever aspect of it was, the user interface software or the instructions for use or what was explained during training or in the quick reference guide, there will be an expectation from the agency that you take advantage of that opportunity to improve the device user interface, and in many cases, do some additional human factors validation testing to show that the changes you've made are effective in lowering those errors, and also have not introduced the possibility of new errors of such kinds. So I needed to speed up there towards the end, and thanks for helping me with my time management, Larry. And I just wanted to say a few things real quickly about things to think about in terms of human factors engineering and innovative things. When you're talking about innovative technologies, think about innovative training and certification. A lot of repetition maybe, or really taking advantage of graphical ways of presenting information to helping people understand conceptually what's going on, and understand also just functionally and operationally how to make connections and such, really optimize that. Contextual inquiry is what we call it in the business, but really going out there and seeing people use these therapies to understand how your users live and perform the tasks. Invest heavily in your formative testing so that you really can, and listen with an open mind to the results you get during your formative testing, to really take advantage of that time to learn and improve the device design. And in the United States, again, I reiterate that the way we execute care at home is different than overseas. And really, you need to make all those aspects of training and the user interface design that much stronger so that it can be used successfully at home with caregivers and patients. So I hope that this has been of value to you. Here are some points of contact in the human factors team in CDRH. Feel free to reach out to us with questions. We can't be super specific outside of the realm of a Q submission that was described so well by Hema. But for general questions, please do reach out to us. So there you go. There's my presentation. And I think we've left time for questions.
No, we actually haven't. We're way behind. Janine,
oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. No, that's all right.
That's okay.
Thanks,
Janine.
No, thanks.